and they will take you up to 4 o'clock. Joining us now, Dan Devine, Yahoo Sports, one of my very favorite follows on Twitter, does a great job breaking down the NBA. Dan is a special guest for us today because I think you're the only national media person who just outwardly was like, I'm taking James Harden out, I'm putting Domantas Sabonis into the All-Star game, and that's what it is. So thank you and congratulations on being one of the rare ones that'll give Domas a little credit.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure. I don't know that I understand why it would be a hot take to have a guy who's averaging like 20, 14, and 6 on 60% shooting and say like that guy should be in the game. It seems to me like a pretty reasonable position to hold, but evidently a minority position. And so I guess, yeah, we'll stand up and take credit for that one. I kind of have to imagine James Harden wouldn't mind the weekend off, right? He seems like a guy that would be able to enjoy a long weekend. So I figure maybe it works out well for everybody.
He's got to stack a single somewhere. But yeah, my bad.
Don't apologize for being great. That's totally fine.
Yeah, I think it's funny you mentioned all of his stats. You forgot that he's shooting 48% from 3, and he's second in the NBA in 3-point percentage.
Yeah, real hater stuff for me to leave that one on the cutting room floor. So I have not looked at the most up-to-date version of it, but I believe when I wrote my All-Star ballot column, which is always a delightful exercise in finding out which people don't like you.
Sure.
I believe it was that the only people that had put up this stat line were him and Wilt or something like that. And it's like, well, generally speaking, if the category that you are putting yourself in is me and Wilt Chamberlain, you are probably worthy of a midseason exhibition spot. That's my general take. But the good news is, guys, it's the only thing people in Sacramento want to talk about Kings-wise. It's the only big ticket item, the only notable issue, and we can just leave it there.
Yeah, well, there's the Trey Lyles trade stuff, but yeah, no, for sure. I think you nailed it. No, I do want to talk about De'Aaron Fox, obviously, because that's what we've been doing for 4 days now. But just on the All-Star stuff,
yeah.
One of the things I have trouble with is like my natural reaction to a consensus take is I'm not a contrarian, but I try and be like, okay, let me understand this other side. What am I missing here?
Right.
And so I try and find out, like, okay, what am I, because Sabonis was left off the All-Star game last year and was left off the All-Star game against this year. And I'm trying to find all these reasons. And what I run into is like, there's not a set criteria for All-Star, and it's more just kind of a vibes thing.
Yes.
Like record counts, but then it doesn't. And like stats matter, but they don't. When you're going through and making an All-Star ballot, what do you look for? What are your criteria?
Yeah, so the criteria point is great because I was talking to some other folks about this recently, and they're like, we got to revisit what the All-Star criteria are. And I'm like, I don't want to blow your mind, but when they ask you if you want to be a voter for this, they say, do you want to do this? You say, yeah, and they send you a link in an email. There's no guidance. There's no thing that says like pick the most excellent, pick the most interesting, pick the most popular. Like, it's just, do you want to do this? Do it. So you got to come up with your own logic, right? And so for me, I often start by kind of just like go through, I mean, at a very basic level. All right, which teams are good and which players are putting up big numbers, right? We'll start there as a general like starting point. I tend to be and have always been somebody who like to dig into the advanced numbers. So I will wind up looking at things like value over replacement player, win share, player efficiency rating, and some of the other gnarlier ones like estimated plus minus, box score plus minus, different things like that. And kind of just get up, like I wind up with what my friend Zach Lowe would call like the Vorps and Schnorps kind of spreadsheet, right? Like look at what those numbers say generally, where are players ranking in those in relation to one another. It's not always the most scientific way to do it, but if you're like averaging those things out, right? You got like 10 or 11 inputs and some guys like up in the top 5 or top 10. Generally speaking, that's an indicator of value to me. And then you look at it and say, well, is that guy putting up those numbers, but it's not impacting winning in a positive way? What's his on-court plus minus look like? How does that relate to his team success? Are they significantly better with him on than off? All of which is to say, a lot of stuff goes into it. And then, yeah, there's sometimes it's just sort of vibesier where you're like, do I feel like I could get away with not having this player for somebody else? Or does this team merit a representative in honor of the first half they're having? And so like, that's why I wind up at some points where it's like Alperen Şengün for a reserve spot. Like the Rockets, to me, needed to have somebody there. But my version of this that I get in trouble for is that I was like, I would prefer not to even put LeBron and Kevin Durant there because A, I know they're going to get voted in by other people. B, I don't think they've necessarily been two of the three best front court players in the West. I think Sabonis might have a better claim to that than those guys do for this first half, if we're being honest. And why, if other people are going to be making the case and sort of raising the flag for some people who don't really necessarily need to have a case made for them, why not make the case for the people who don't get it? And so then when I bet picking my reserves, like, yeah, Sabonis was the first name on my front court reserve ballot because I'm like, the statistical resume is fantastic. The impact on winning is fantastic. The Kings, for their up and down first half, I'm sure that some people were like, they fired their coach. No one on that team is bad. No one on that team should get any recognition. Meanwhile, like, they're right in the middle of that mushy middle of the West with all those other teams, and they've been better than their point differential and all that kind of stuff. Like, clutch games were a problem, and then that reversed itself as soon as Doug Christie got whatever. Like, there's more context to put into it. And to me, I looked at all that and said, Sabonis checks like every box you could ask for, except for maybe flash. And that's a value judgment. That's a style judgment. And people can have that if they want. But if I feel like my job is who's been the best players in the conference for the first half, I couldn't see a way around putting him there. He's been that guy.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. You brought up the Mike Brown thing there. And I want to ask you, because like the coaches do vote on all-star reserves. And do you think that played a role at all in this situation where coaches may have taken something out on Sabonis for what happened to Mike Brown?
Tough to say. I mean, possibly. Whenever, generally speaking, when a coach is fired, I think Rick Carlisle is often sort of the mouthpiece for it as the head of the coach association, where it's like, I don't even know what we're doing anymore. Like, this guy was the best coach of the year 2 years ago, and now all of a sudden he's not good enough. And you sort of get some of that ranks closing, understandably so. I wonder sometimes if it's like, if I'm from a coach's perspective, which of these guys am I most terrified about game planning for? Like, who causes me to lose sleep more often? And, I don't know, insert player here for that. Or sometimes it's just like, it's winning. Tom Thibodeau, Knicks head coach, has said that when you're going through these things, you get to a point where it's like there's 2 or 3 guys and then winning becomes a factor. So maybe in a situation like this year, if you get to that point and you're like, I'm trying to find 2 spots, I have to pick 2 of Sabonis, Şengün, and Jaren Jackson Jr. for 3. So I have 2 spots for those 3 guys. Maybe you look at it and say, who's higher in the standings? It could be a lot of reasons why. I personally don't feel like any of the arguments that I've heard outside of just the best teams need to have a guy that leaves Sabonis. The arguments that leave Sabonis on the cutting room floor don't hold water to me. But last I checked, and unless you guys have heard something different, I am not an NBA head coach. So, which is probably good for 30 fan bases, right? I don't think
this interview's over. You're not a head coach.
Wait a sec.
Listen, I mean, I've got some irons in the fire, guys. But yeah, no one has yet to entrust me with the management of their organization, and maybe what's best for everybody. So all I can do is vote on the starters. I did that, and then after that, everything I say is just it's hearsay. But we'll do the best we can.
So we're talking with Dan Devine, Yahoo Sports. Does a great job covering the NBA there. I want to shift gears to De'Aaron Fox now. Also didn't make the All-Star team. Less egregious than Sabonis for sure. I guess I'll start here. If you're the Kings, what do you do in this situation with 6 days left until the trade deadline and De'Aaron Fox's future in Sacramento wavering a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, where you're at now, if the information you're getting or the motivation for this whole endeavor is you don't believe that De'Aaron Fox is going to sign an extension come the offseason because he declined the offer this past summer. Mm-hmm. Things have not gone so hot since then. He was left to be sort of the face of Mike Brown's exit, fairly or unfairly, the way that was navigated. And he doesn't seem to want to stick around. It is your responsibility as an organization at that point to say, well, all right, how do we not wind up losing this player for nothing if you don't feel like you can change the course of that dynamic, that relationship? I think you have to. It's a tricky spot to be in, because I wouldn't want to be the front office that traded De'Aaron Fox for 35 cents on the dollar just because he said in a year and a half he didn't want to be here. I would, if the offers that I got were like maybe a two bad protected firsts and some salary I didn't want, I think you'd have to say we will, respectfully decline that and revisit this in the summertime when there maybe are more people that can be involved in the bidding and there's more optionality and more opportunities. And also maybe we will have had a really great 3 months and we can change some discussions about the way things work. But I think you have to, at this point, say you got to put yourself in position to maximize return. And if you are of the mindset that nothing you do is going to change the mind, then you probably are you might have a better shot at maximizing return with a year and a half left on the deal and like 2 potential playoff runs of Fox for the onboarding team rather than just one. So yeah, I mean, you gotta be beating the bushes. You got to be accepting all calls, and you got to be considering your options. I don't think it's where anybody really would have wanted this to go. But if this is where the relationship dynamics and the relative lack of success in building around Fox and Sabonis have got you to this point, now you have to be open to all opportunities.
Dan, when we're talking about the potential trade that, the team that I've heard that he would like to go to is San Antonio Spurs, right? Where do you see that fit with Victor Wembanyama? Do you like that fit? And I know this is more your wheelhouse, the analytics side of it.
Sure.
Like, how do you think that partnership would actually form on the court?
Yeah, I think that is the widespread understanding or belief around the league, is that if there is a one destination that De'Aaron Fox would prefer to go to, it would be next to the gigantic French guy. And I think the argument would be, we've seen last year, Victor Wembanyama struggled at times and the Spurs offense struggled at times because they didn't have a point guard who regularly got him the ball. You put him next to Trey Jones and all of a sudden the numbers were fantastic. And it's like, so if you put like a slightly above average point guard who can run pick and roll next to Victor Wembanyama, you're going to have a pretty good offense. This year they put Chris Paul there and they've been pretty fantastic with Chris Paul and Victor Wembanyama on the court together. The offense has actually worked pretty well. And it's like, well, if that guy was a threat to drive and get all the way to the basket and like a persistent 25-point scorer, which for all the things that Chris Paul is, he is not that at this point in his career. That is a level of dynamism that feels like it could open things up. Victor Wembanyama becoming a high volume, pretty decent efficiency 3-point shooter could mitigate to some degree the inconsistency in De'Aaron Fox's 3-point game, right? Because if you're concerned about spacing and the way that opponents could adjust their defensive coverages, well, if you got a spacing 5, a guy who's a pop threat, we've seen this year with Sabonis becoming a significantly better or higher volume and higher accuracy 3-point shooter, it changes the geometry of the floor a little bit, and then it creates more downhill driving lanes, more space for Fox to get downhill. If you put that ecosystem around them where there are more guys who can shoot, Steph Castle makes an advancement if he doesn't wind up in Sacramento in the deal. The Champagne, like the Harrison Barnes and the guys that are the other guys there, Devin Vassell, whoever would wind up being left over, there's more guys who can shoot and theoretically space. And if you have space and guys who can stretch the floor with a Wembanyama Fox pick and roll, that feels to me like a pretty powerful start to a good offense. And then whatever occasional lapses De'Aaron Fox can have as a defender, I think he's got the capacity to be excellent. We've seen that from him on the ball. Everybody that's young falls asleep off the ball. Sometimes it happens, but we've seen Fox be a high-level defender. You put that guy behind him, I think you got a recipe for something pretty good pretty quick. But Fox's shooting would be a concern that I would have there, and I think how you would build out the rest of the roster, which, stop me if you've heard this before, it's the case with it whenever you've got, you're building around your point guard and your big man, how you fill out the wings matters a great deal. And I think San Antonio has a lot of options. They've got a lot of draft picks. They got a lot of young players in development there. But it would be, to me, a pretty powerful start. But the price tag would matter a great deal because you got to figure out who you're playing with once you actually get there. And I think that's probably where the rubber meets the road for Sacramento.
Imagine that, Kyle. Wings matter.
What?
What? You have to get wings?
Get the Kings front office on the horn now.
They need wings? You need wings to be successful? I think De'Aaron Fox may have said this once.
You mentioned
maybe one time.
And talking with Dan Devine, covers the NBA for Yahoo Sports. You mentioned Stephon Castle there.
Yeah.
And my belief is this Fox trade stuff is, I think he's going to stay in Sacramento and they'll revisit it this summer, kind of like you were saying. But I think Stephon Castle is a player we're going to talk about a lot. What are your thoughts on him after 43 games or however many it's been?
Yeah, I think he's the kind of player that you still have to wish cast a little bit and say the shot's not there as consistently as you want it. The feel and the play or the on-ball playmaking is not where you'd want it to be. I think everybody kind of expected that would be the case. He was a little bit more of a combo player at UConn. He was not like the primary all-the-time ball handler. What was enticing and exciting about him was like size, length, defensive ability, athleticism, and the idea that he could, even without being an immediate, whatever, Trae Young or Luka Doncic level, like creator on the ball, a guy who could play a big role right away. And you've seen that, like he's looked really comfortable playing off of Chris Paul as the 2 guard there because you can get away with that. It's not a small backcourt. He's 6'6", and pretty NBA ready defensively. Also, the feel, I think, and I'm not as we've established, I'm not a coach, but watching him, I'm like, that guy has a nose for how to get to the rim off the ball. He's a smart cutter. He seems to have a good sense of timing, how to make himself available. Improvising is where like Chris Paul will, call him over for a screen, and he's got a good sense of like, oh, I need to make this my angle on the screen so that I can then slip or roll and get into space. And then he's a good enough like secondary playmaker to where if you get him the ball and a 4-on-3 or in the pass in the pocket where he can play make in the middle of the floor, he can do that. It's just maybe not like you wouldn't want to run 50 pick and rolls a game with him just yet. So I think that there's like what you have right away is a pretty exciting like toolbox for what could wind up being a really high level 2-way guard. And he's already somebody that looks the part on the floor on the defensive end to me, but like not in a high usage way. So the thing that I loved most about what the Spurs did was it felt like the Castle pick was it was like a kind of a home run swing. Like we don't think we're going to be in the high lottery again for a while. So let's get a guy that we feel like it has the talent to be able to grow into, but also just building wise, like he's huge. If you play him at the 1, he's a really big point guard. And so if you're the Spurs, you're saying Wembanyama obviously is huge. Jeremy Sohan is like 6'9", playing the 4. Devin Vassell is has a plus wingspan at whether he's at the 2 or the 3. You again, guys like Julian Champagny. You can start building a huge defense. And again, like that very simple idea of if our guys are really big, it's going to be hard to score. And like we have good length everywhere. We've got good athleticism all over the place, and we've got long arms everywhere. We're probably going to be pretty decent on defense. And the quickest way from bad to decent is going from a bad defense to a decent defense. And so that was like, it struck me as a smart way to build out your assets. Like we think this is like a table stakes, a good defender with a high ceiling to get to. So if I'm the front office in Sacramento and I'm looking at like what I would love to start with, again, I think all those same things would apply here. The better you can have your ball pressure, the better you can have where your defenders are switchable, interchangeable, long. It gives you a better starting point to get consistently decent to good on defense, which, as you guys well know, is not something that has been true of very many Kings teams for the last decade and a half or longer. So I think a sustainable, decent, like high floor there goes a long way towards getting you into some pretty interesting conversations competitively.
Tall, athletic guys on the perimeter.
Kyle, he just keeps hitting all of the
stuff for Sacramento.
Like, we talk about these things. They're like,
hey Dan, you want to be in the Kings front office?
He should just be the other insider with us. Like we just talk about this all day long. Like
figuring this
size,
thing out.
athleticism, strength. Okay, so I'm gonna just ask you, if you were the Kings, what would you ask for from the Spurs? If you're giving up De'Aaron Fox right now, like whether it's the summer or right now, I don't think it really matters because I think you're going to be asking for the same things.
Yeah, I mean, I think you start from I want all of it, right? Like the beginning of my conversation is like I want, I don't know, several first-round picks and a couple of swaps. I want your best young player, and I want some salary. Like I want some matching salary that I can get off the books and give myself some flexibility. Either guys that I can repackage who are on like, short term the next couple of years or expirings. Like I'm starting from the position of I think De'Aaron Fox is an all NBA player, so I want a deal commensurate with that level of talent. And I'm not necessarily saying it's got to be, the Mikal Bridges deal or it's got to be the Donovan Mitchell deal, but that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking like, I have the best asset in this deal. I have the thing you want. So make me an offer that's worth my while. Now, the realities of the situation as we've laid them out, where Fox maybe doesn't want to extend. So, a would-be bidder knows, well, you can't like totally ask me for everything. And saying like, well, we know he kind of wants to get to this one particular place. So like, I'm not going to necessarily fork over everything to you. If I am not confident that I can re-sign him, whatever, that probably drops your price tag a little bit. But I think from the Kings front office, it's got to be multiple first-round picks and some young talent that I can use to build whatever is coming next. I think the interesting question then is like, what does Sacramento think the immediate post-Fox future looks like? Do the Kings think, well, Sabonis on his extension, Malik Monk for multiple years from here? We see where DeMar DeRozan is in the first year of his deal. Obviously he has been said like, I'd have to reconsider what my future might look like, but this is essentially the starting point of our core. Do we think that is like still a consistently competitive core moving forward? Do we believe in those like small sample-ish Domas, DeRozan, Monk on, Fox off numbers, and we think that that's really a place to whatever, how real do we think that is? Do we think that's a viable path forward? And so then are we looking for more win now guys rather than that like long-term flexibility? Do we prioritize somebody that we think works better alongside those? It might be a little bit tricky to find where a team's like, we're bringing in Fox because we think Fox makes us like a playoff team, but we're going to trade you playoff caliber guys right now. Like that, then that finding the marriage becomes a little bit tricky. But I think that's the question to me there is like, how good do the Kings think they can be right now without De'Aaron Fox? And if they think the answer is good, then I imagine what they're looking for is like, we want help right today. If they think the answer is like, I don't really know, then the answer is we got to give ourselves as much optionality as possible to be able to answer that question in a year, in 2 years, and maybe find the best competitive fit around Sabonis moving forward.
Dan, got about 30 seconds here. Thumbs up or thumbs down on 10-minute quarters?
Thumbs up in that like more I can get through the better, but I don't know. Stop messing with the game a little bit. Like the game is good. Let's watch basketball and enjoy it. It's really fun and people like it. And you just got paid $76 billion because people like it. So let's just watch it. What if we just watch the basketball the way the basketball is? Imagine that.
It's the take.
I'm with him.
Dan Devine, Yahoo Sports, your man Devine on Twitter does a great job there. Dan, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to hop on with us. We'll do it again soon.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks so much for having me.